On this episode of MotoringBox, we're going to be replacing the intercooler on my BA Falcon XR6 Turbo. Hit it! This episode of MotoringBox is proudly supported by PWR, Advanced Cooling Technology. Welcome back to MotoringBox. I'm Sean McKellar. This is my BA Falcon XR6 Turbo, which we're kicking off a little bit of a bolt-on series with. In the previous video, I've actually upgraded the radiator with a quality 55mm PWR unit, and it fitted in really well. I was really impressed with the build quality of it, and it's really going to do a fantastic job keeping this Barra turbo cool when we go and get it tuned a bit later on. So really, a radiator and an intercooler, they're both very important things when you're going to get an engine tuned, because you're going to be bumping up the power outputs, especially on a Barra turbo, by probably at least 50 or 100 kilowatts for a mild kind of a build like this one. So for an engine that's generating all that extra power, you need extra cooling. So we've got the radiator to take care of the engine coolant temperatures, but I think the stock standard intercooler is not going to cope very well with the upgraded power. Now, the factory intercooler on this engine is sort of a return style unit. So the hot air, or the charged air from the turbo, goes down into the front bar through the intercooler and then actually doubles back and then comes back up here through the throttle body into the inlet manifold into the engine. And it really is a fairly neat way that it's been packaged. I really love how this sort of crossover piece on the top of the engine looks. And I want to keep the stock airbox. It's got an under headlight intake as well, so I don't really want to throw all of that out the window. And that's really what you have to do when you go for a sort of flow through style intercooler. You have the charged air going down through the intercooler, and then you have to get extra pipe work to sort of bring it up on the passenger side. And there's a few different routes it can go from there. Some people will bring it up the passenger side and sort of loop it around into the throttle body. Or perhaps the best kit I've seen which goes that way is the Ant Stage 2 intercooler kit. And you basically end up with a nice sort of black intercooler piping coming up on the passenger side, running across the front, and then it kind of comes up and around like that. So I was initially looking at a kit like that, but there are a few problems that I have with it. The first is you have to move the battery to the passenger side of the engine bay, which means you have to get rid of the airbox, and you end up with a sort of turbo side intake under a sort of metal shroud of some sort. So to do that, you are sort of screwing around a lot with how the engine bay is laid out and how it looks. And in my opinion, it kind of screams aftermarket in a way, and I sort of prefer to keep my cars looking original. And I really do love, as I mentioned, this sort of crossover piece with the turbo intercooled insignia on the top there. I want to leave that alone. So if you want to leave the sort of return styled intercooled setup in place and the existing intake piping, your next option is on eBay, one of those sort of Monza style intercoolers. And I was initially looking at these. You can get them pretty cheaply, under 300 bucks from memory. But they don't really instill me with a lot of confidence. I've been reading online, apparently they're not even that much better than the stock standard intercooler. They are a little bit bigger, but for some reason, maybe they're not as efficient, or they're just not built as well. And if you have a look at the picture on this listing that I'll put on screen, it's actually got damage, even for a brand new part. So it doesn't really instill me with a lot of confidence to go down that route, even though it is very cheap. And I know there's a lot of people out there running those units. But that's not really what this build's about, or this bolt-on series anyway. I've gone with a quality PWR radiator. They're quite expensive, but it's really arguably the best of the best when it comes to radiators for these cars. So I actually decided to stick with PWR for the intercooler, and that is where this thing comes in. So this is a PWI-5405 return style intercooler. So this intercooler actually has a 55mm thick core, exactly the same as the radiator and also exactly the same as the stock standard intercooler. They're all 55mm. And the length of this intercooler is almost, again, exactly the same as the stock standard one. But when you look at the height of the core itself is exactly double the stock standard intercooler. So I don't know how much extra cooling power that's going to give us, but I reckon it's going to make a fair bit of a difference. So I have had a bit of a peek at this thing already. I've already opened the box, but I haven't pulled the intercooler out of the bubble wrap yet. So I'll bring you guys along for the ride and let's have a look and see what I've got here. Would you take a look at this intercooler, guys? I think it looks absolutely incredible. Just like with the PWR radiator, it has completely blown my expectations out of the water. The build quality looks amazing, and check out these welds. As some people say, they look like sort of dimes, or I guess the Australian version of that would be 5-cent pieces. They are just, look, they're amazing. I don't have any other words to explain it. So I'm really hoping this will be a fairly easy installation. As far as I'm aware, all we have to do is just connect the stock intercooler, which is right here, by taking off the top pipe, which you can just see maybe on the top. And there's another one, of course, on the bottom. And this top pipe actually has to be trimmed because you see it runs all the way along to here. Whereas on this intercooler, it actually has this kind of pipe built in, and then the connection's all the way down here. So I believe we'll just have to measure this pipe and then work out whereabouts we need to trim it in order to fit onto this connection here. Fingers crossed, it's not a difficult job, but I guess we'll see. I've already got the car jacked up, as you can tell, just because this is a fairly tall intercooler and it has to obviously feed up from the bottom. So yeah, let's get this stock one out, and it'll be really interesting to compare the two as well, just to see how they look size-wise. So yeah, let's get to it. So to begin with, I'm going to remove the plastic energy absorber off the front crash bar on the car. This is actually extremely easy, just a couple of bolts and both of the panels will pull straight off. Next up, I'm going to loosen and remove the hose clamps on both of the intercooler pipes. For the top hose, we need to undo the clamps at either end of the hose, and for the bottom one, there's just a simple clamp which we need to pull out of the way. Now that the hoses are ready to go, we can have a look at how this existing intercooler is secured to the vehicle. You'll notice on the passenger side there are two nuts securing the intercooler to a bracket. And on the driver's side there is a slightly more complicated arrangement. To help with access, I'm also going to pull this wiring loom out of the way first. And I found the easiest way to get the passenger side nuts off is using a spanner. I don't have any fancy tools here, but a spanner is absolutely going to get the job done. You can access the top nut from the top of the bar, and the bottom one is a lot easier to get to from underneath. You're also going to need to hang on to all of these nuts because you're going to need them again on the reassembly. Here's one of the mounting points for the driver's side bracket underneath the crash bar. There's an additional mounting point on the top of the crash bar, and then we also need to undo the nut which holds the intercooler to the bracket itself. With all of these brackets undone and hanging loosely, it's actually just the intercooler piping which is holding the intercooler in place. So we can pull it out from under the vehicle and get a look at this thing for the first time. And on first inspections it looks pretty good, but it's not until you put it up against our replacement intercooler that you can get an appreciation on just how much of an upgrade this PWR intercooler is going to be. The height of the intercooler core is at least double. And looking at it visually, I would say it's perhaps a little bit higher even again. So before we install the brand new intercooler, we need to transfer some of these mounting blocks. These are basically bolts which have a big rubber spacer. You simply have to unscrew them by hand from the existing intercooler and transfer them across to the brand new one. And with that, I'm going to raise our brand new intercooler up into the front of the vehicle. You'll notice I had to loosen the power steering cooler in order to gain a little bit more space. With the intercooler in place, the mounting bolts lined up exactly with the existing bracket. And I'm going to install the nuts on the passenger side to hold the intercooler in place, so we can then move on to the driver's side and install them too. With the intercooler brackets secured on both sides, I'm going to reinstall the horns. You'll notice that I had to rotate the horns 180 degrees to get them to fit, but in hindsight this is probably not a good idea because moisture and other assorted garbage will actually be able to fall down into the horns themselves. So I'm going to come back at a later date and spin these around, and you'll see I'm using a bit of WD-40 as a bit of lube on the lower side of the intercooler so I can reinstall the lower intercooler pipe. This one went straight on without any issues, but it turns out for the upper intercooler pipe I'll need to get a silicone joiner to connect these two pipes together. Trimming down the existing pipe is unfortunately not going to work at all. Right guys, we are done for today. We couldn't quite finish the job because it turns out we need a little joiner piece to connect the piping to the intercooler. The existing pipe, it's a little bit too rigid, and you'll notice the ends of that pipe are actually flared. So if you cut, say, one end of the pipe off, you're going to have a flare on one end and then no flare on the other side, and I don't think it's going to work. So I'm going to have to measure each end here, find a silicone joiner in black that matches, and install it coming up soon. So you'll probably see that done in the next video, but yeah, I'll have to get that sorted out in the meantime. But otherwise, I'm really happy with how this intercooler all fitted up. It's a really tight fit. As with the radiator, it seems that PWR have gone right on the limit with what actually fits in the front end of this vehicle. So yes, if you want to go for a return style intercooler like this one, I reckon there's probably nothing better on the market. This thing is bang on. It's really got really tight tolerances, and that does make it a little bit tricky from time to time when you're installing it. I had to bend the horn bracket and sort of rotate the horns themselves so they point up now just to get a little bit of extra clearance. They were pointing down previously and the edges of the horns here were actually rubbing on the intercooler, and I don't think it was going to fit, so you have to sort of massage a few things in the front end here just to get everything to fit. So yeah, that's about it. Really happy with the product. I think it looks amazing. It hangs down a little bit lower than the old one, but I trust PWR. I think it's going to fit up once the front bar goes back on. It'll look perfect. So what do you reckon about this intercooler install? Would you go for this option, or would you have done something different? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really happy with how this has turned out. I can't wait to keep progressing with this little bolt-on series. I've got a few more parts coming, and later on down the track, we'll go and get this car tuned and see what we can do with it. So thank you very much for watching, guys. As always, like, comment, share, subscribe, do all those things. If you want to support the channel, I do have a Patreon account. You can get your name down here in the credits. All of these legendary people have been supporting me for months on end. And yeah, check out some of the other videos on the channel, and hopefully I'll see you next time.